Marcus Bennett's hand froze on his daughter's shoulder, his breath catching as he watched the woman ahead carefully place something back into the dumpster. It wasn't desperation in her movements, it was reverence. "I'm not looking for food, sweetheart," the woman said, turning toward 7-year-old Emma with eyes that held storms. "I'm looking for proof that I once existed." Emma gasped, her small fingers tightening around her father's coat. The leather-bound book clutched against the woman's chest seemed to pulse with secrets in the dim streetlight. Marcus felt his world tilt as recognition flickered. Those hands, scarred yet graceful, moved like a conductor's. He'd seen them before, somewhere in his grief-hazed memories. The woman's gaze met his across the snowy pavement, and her whispered words cut through the Christmas Eve silence. "Your wife, she used my recipes." "Get in the car," Marcus commanded his daughter, his voice barely steady. But his eyes never left the stranger who somehow knew Sarah's secrets. What else did she know about his dead wife? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Bennett had built his fortune on reading people, on understanding what they needed before they knew it themselves. His company, Tech Family Solutions, connected families through digital platforms worth $50 million. But standing in his marble-floored foyer, watching this homeless woman move through his kitchen like she belonged there, he felt like a stranger in his own life. Emma pressed herself against his side, her small hand finding his. At 7 years old, she possessed an unsettling wisdom that came from losing her mother too young. Her dark hair, so much like Sarah's, caught the light as she whispered, "She smells like cookies and sadness, Daddy." The woman, Isabella, she'd finally offered her name, stood at his granite countertop with her back to them. Her threadbare coat hung over a chair, revealing a faded restaurant uniform underneath. The leather recipe book sat open beside her, its pages yellowed and stained with what looked like tears. "Sarah Bennett," Isabella said without turning around, her fingers tracing something on the page. She attended culinary school at Johnson Wales. Second in her class. She specialized in comfort food with elegant presentations. She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "She died of leukemia 2 years ago." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd never told anyone outside family about Sarah's culinary background, how she'd given up her chef dreams to help him build his company, how she'd turned their home into a restaurant-quality kitchen, how she'd kept cooking even when the chemotherapy stole her sense of taste. "How could you possibly know that?" His voice came out sharper than intended. Isabella finally turned, and he saw tears streaming down her face. In her hands, she held a photograph that had fallen from the recipe book, Sarah in chef's whites, standing beside a younger Isabella, both of them laughing. "Because she was my mentor, my friend. And when I lost everything, when my world fell apart, she was the only person who believed my story." Emma stepped forward, her child's intuition cutting through the adult tension. "Were you Mommy's friend? She used to talk about a friend who made food that tasted like hugs." Isabella knelt to Emma's eye level, her voice breaking. "She talked about you too, little star. She said you had your daddy's eyes, but your own brave heart." The kitchen fell silent, except for the soft tick of the grandfather clock Sarah had insisted they buy for their first anniversary. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. A door he'd kept locked since the funeral, since he'd boxed up Sarah's chef knives and hidden her recipe collection. Outside, snow began to fall against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, Christmas music drifted from a neighbor's house. Dorothy Harrison's house, specifically, where the 72-year-old widow always played carols too loud and baked too much for one person. "I should go," Isabella whispered, reaching for her coat. "No," Emma said with startling firmness. "Mommy would want you to stay for Christmas cookies. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of Texas sunshine that made even December feel hopeful. Marcus found Isabella already awake in the guest room, sitting by the window with her recipe book open across her lap. She'd changed into one of Sarah's old sweaters. Emma had insisted the night before, dragging it from the closet with the determined authority only children possess. "I haven't celebrated Christmas in 3 years," Isabella said without looking up as Marcus appeared in the doorway with coffee. "After everything fell apart, holidays just became reminders of what I'd lost." He handed her the steaming mug, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. "Want to talk about what happened?" Isabella closed the recipe book carefully, her fingers lingering on the worn leather cover. "I was Isabella Martinez Chen then. Published 3 cookbooks, had a restaurant in development, food blog with 2 million followers. My ex-husband David managed my business side." Her laugh held no humor. "I thought partnership meant sharing everything. Turns out for him, it meant taking everything." Emma burst through the door in her Christmas pajamas, effectively ending the conversation. "Bella, Santa came, and he left cookies for us to bake together." The morning unfolded with the chaotic joy unique to Christmas with a child. Emma tore through presents while Isabella watched from the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast. Marcus noticed how she moved, economical, purposeful, like someone who'd learned not to waste anything, including motion. "Your turn," Emma announced, dragging Isabella to the tree. "Santa left something for you, too." A small wrapped box sat beneath the lowest branch. Isabella's face went pale. "Sweetheart, Santa doesn't visit homeless people." "He does in our house," Emma replied with such fierce certainty that Marcus felt his throat tighten. Inside the box was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny whisk. The card read, "For someone who stirs hearts as well as soup. Santa," with help from Emma. Isabella's composure finally cracked. She pulled Emma into a hug that lasted long enough for Marcus to slip away and call his neighbor. Dorothy Harrison answered on the first ring. "About time you called, Marcus Bennett. I've been watching that girl through my kitchen window and she's got healing hands. Dot, she's homeless, I know. Also talented, kind, and exactly what that baby of yours needs. And don't you dare tell me it's complicated because of money. I didn't survive the Depression by caring what people thought about who deserved what." Through the window, Marcus watched Isabella teaching Emma to roll pie crust, their heads bent together in concentration. Emma's laughter carried through the glass, genuine and bright in a way he hadn't heard since Sarah's funeral. "Sarah would have loved her," he admitted. "Sarah did love her, honey. That photo in her recipe book, that's not coincidence. Sarah mentored that girl, and now she's here when Emma needs her most. Some people call that fate. I call it love working through time." The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Victoria Ashford arrived first, her sleek BMW purring into the driveway like a predator. Sarah's younger sister stepped out wearing designer everything and an expression that could freeze champagne. "Marcus, we need to talk," Victoria announced, barely glancing at Isabella, who was washing dishes. "Privately. Anything you need to say can be said in front of Isabella." Victoria's perfectly manicured eyebrows rose. "The homeless woman you picked up is still here. Marcus, think about Emma." What kind of message does this send? That kindness matters more than appearances? That you're having a breakdown and making poor decisions that could affect Emma's stability? The words hung in the air like poison. Isabella quietly dried her hands and reached for her coat. "I should go," she whispered. "No," Emma said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with flour in her hair and determination in her eyes. "This is Bella's home now. Tell her, Daddy." Before Marcus could respond, Dorothy Harrison's voice called from the back door. "Knock, knock! Hope you got room for one more at dinner?" The 72-year-old swept in carrying a casserole dish and radiating the kind of energy that made people half her age feel tired. She took one look at Victoria's hostile stance and Isabella's defeated posture and smiled with dangerous sweetness. "Victoria Ashford, as I live and breathe, still trying to run other people's lives, I see. Mrs. Harrison, this is a family matter. Honey, I've known this family longer than you've been part of it. Watched Marcus and Sarah fall in love, held Emma the day she came home from the hospital. And I'm telling you right now, that girl there," she pointed at Isabella, "has more family spirit in her little finger than you've got in your whole designer outfit." Victoria's face flushed. "I'm looking out for Emma's welfare. She needs stability, not some stranger playing house. Emma needs love, which she's getting plenty of. What she doesn't need is relatives who show up only to spread poison." The tension crackled until Emma's small voice cut through it. "Aunt Victoria, why are you being mean to Bella? She makes Daddy smile again." The simple question landed like a physical blow. Victoria looked at her niece, really looked, and for a moment her composure wavered. "Emmy, I just want what's best for you." "Then be nice to Bella." "She makes cookies that taste like hugs, and she doesn't cry in the bathroom like the babysitters do." The admission hit Marcus like a truck. He'd hired a series of nannies since Sarah's death, all of whom had quit within weeks. He'd assumed it was Emma's difficult behavior, never considering that his daughter was protective of caregivers who couldn't handle the emotional weight of a grieving household. Dorothy stepped forward and placed a weathered hand on Victoria's arm. "Sweetie, I know you loved Sarah, and I know you're scared of losing connection to Emma. But pushing away the people who make this house feel like home again isn't the answer." Victoria's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Sarah was my sister, my best friend, and he just moved on." "I haven't moved on," Marcus said quietly, "but I've learned the difference between honoring Sarah's memory and imprisoning ourselves in it." Sarah would want Emma to have someone who makes cookies that taste like hugs. Isabella had been silent through the entire exchange, but now she spoke softly. "Sarah used to say that love multiplies, it doesn't divide. Having room in your heart for someone new doesn't mean you love the people you've lost any less." The words hung in the warm kitchen air, seasoned with the scent of cinnamon and home. Outside, the Texas sun painted everything golden, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the end of Christmas Day. The first week of January brought unseasonably warm weather to Austin, the kind that made locals joke about wearing shorts to New Year's parties. But inside Marcus's house, a different kind of warmth had settled, the comfortable rhythm of a family finding itself. Isabella had transformed more than just the kitchen. She'd somehow made the cavernous rooms feel inhabited again, filled with the sounds of simmering pots and Emma's laughter. Marcus found himself coming home for lunch, something he hadn't done since Sarah's diagnosis. "Daddy, look what Bella taught me," Emma announced as he walked through the door on Tuesday afternoon. She stood on a step stool at the stove, carefully stirring what looked like risotto. "It's called cooking with love. And you have to taste it with your heart, not just your mouth." Isabella stood beside her, one protective hand hovering near Emma's elbow. She wore another of Sarah's sweaters, this one forest green with tiny holes at the cuffs. It should have bothered Marcus seeing someone else in his wife's clothes. Instead, it felt like Sarah giving her blessing. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked Isabella as Emma proudly served him a spoonful of perfectly creamy risotto. "My grandmother mostly. She came from Guadalajara with nothing but recipes memorized by heart. Said food was the only wealth that couldn't be stolen." Isabella's smile faltered slightly. Turns out she was wrong about that. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the doorbell rang. Through the front window he could see a news van parked at the curb, a reporter checking her reflection in the side mirror. "Marcus Bennett?" The woman at the door wore a predatory smile and held a microphone. "Jennifer Walsh, Channel 4 News. We're doing a piece on local holiday generosity. Can you tell us about your house guest?" Behind the reporter, a cameraman was already filming. Marcus felt Isabella step back into the shadows of the hallway. "I don't have any comment," Marcus said, moving to close the door. "Is it true you're romantically involved with a homeless woman? Our sources say she's been living here for over a week." The words hit like ice water. Marcus's jaw tightened. "My personal life isn't news. When you're worth $50 million and the woman in question has an interesting criminal background, it becomes public interest. Did you know Isabella Martinez has been arrested twice for vagrancy? That she was fired from her last job for theft?" The lies came so smoothly that Marcus almost believed them himself. He glanced back at Isabella, who had gone white as paper. "Get off my property," he said, slamming the door. But the damage was done. Within hours, his phone buzzed with calls from board members, investors, friends. The story had legs, and it was running. Dorothy appeared at his back door that evening, carrying a casserole and wearing a thunderous expression. "Those vultures been bothering you too?" "They tried to interview me about the situation next door," she said, setting the dish on his counter with unnecessary force. "I told them if they wanted a story, they should investigate whoever's feeding them lies." Isabella sat at the kitchen table, her recipe book open but untouched. Emma leaned against her shoulder, chattering about her day at school, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. "I should leave," Isabella said quietly after Emma went to bed. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "You're not going anywhere," Marcus replied. But even as he said it, he felt the weight of responsibility. His company's IPO was scheduled for March. Negative publicity could destroy everything he'd built. The next morning brought worse news. Victoria called before 7 a.m. "Marcus, what the hell are you thinking? Emma's school is buzzing with gossip. Some parents are asking if it's appropriate for her to be around that woman. Her name is Isabella, and she's the best thing that's happened to this house since Sarah died. Sarah's been dead for 2 years. You can't replace her with some homeless woman you picked up off the street." The cruelty in Victoria's voice made Marcus's hand tighten on the phone. "I'm not trying to replace Sarah, but Emma deserves happiness, and Isabella makes her happy. Emma deserves stability. Do you know what happens to children when their parents make impulsive decisions based on loneliness? I've been researching family court cases." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Victoria had always been protective of Emma, but this felt different, dangerous. That afternoon, Marcus found Isabella in Dorothy's kitchen. The two women were kneading bread together, their hands working the dough in synchronized movements that spoke of shared understanding. "Dorothy's been teaching me her mother's recipe," Isabella explained, flour dusting her dark hair. "She says bread is hope you can hold in your hands." Dorothy looked up from her portion of dough. "I also told her that sometimes hope needs defending." The older woman's eyes held a sharpness that reminded Marcus she'd survived the Depression, raised 5 children alone after her husband died in Vietnam, and run a successful restaurant for 30 years. Dorothy Harrison was not someone to underestimate. "What do you know about the news story?" Marcus asked. "I know lies when I hear them. Isabella doesn't have any arrest record. I called my nephew, who works dispatch. And the theft accusation? Pure fabrication." Dorothy's weathered hands shaped the dough with practiced efficiency. "Someone's working real hard to destroy that girl's reputation. Question is, who benefits?" The answer came the next day in the form of a certified letter. Victoria's attorney was filing for emergency custody of Emma, citing Marcus's unstable living situation and poor judgment regarding appropriate caregivers. Isabella found him in his study that evening, staring at the legal documents spread across his desk. "This is my fault," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is Victoria's doing, not yours. Emma could lose her home because of me, because I was selfish enough to stay when I should have kept walking." Marcus looked up at her. Really looked. In the lamplight he could see the girl she'd once been, before whatever had broken her so thoroughly. He could also see the woman she was becoming again, day by day, in his kitchen and in Emma's heart. Sarah used to say that love wasn't something you earned or deserved. It was something you recognized when it found you. He reached for Isabella's hand. "Emma recognized you from the first moment. So did I." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "What if we fight this and lose? What if Emma ends up with Victoria anyway, but now she's lost you too because of the scandal?" It was the question that had been haunting Marcus since the custody papers arrived. His company, his reputation, his relationship with Emma, everything he'd built was at risk. The smart move would be to let Isabella go quietly, prove to the courts that he could prioritize Emma's stability over his own desires. "There's something else," Isabella said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "I got this today." Inside was a single sheet of paper, an offer letter from a restaurant in Portland. "They saw the news story, but they know my real work. They're offering me executive chef position, full relocation package. I could disappear, start over where nobody knows about any of this." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. It was the perfect solution for everyone except the little girl upstairs who had finally learned to sleep through the night without nightmares. Outside, Austin's evening symphony was beginning. Crickets and distant traffic, the soft murmur of neighbors talking over backyard fences. Normal life, continuing despite the chaos. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Isabella looked toward the stairs where Emma slept. "I want to stay and fight, but I want Emma's happiness more than my own." The decision to stay and fight changed everything. Within 48 hours, Marcus had assembled a legal team that cost more per hour than most people made in a month. But money, he was learning, couldn't buy back reputation once it was shredded in the court of public opinion. Emma sensed the tension immediately. She began setting 4 places at the dinner table instead of 3, insisting the extra seat was for Mommy's spirit. When Marcus gently suggested they only needed 3 settings, Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But what if Bella has to go away too? Then we'll need the extra place for missing her." The child's logic was heartbreaking and sound. Isabella found Marcus that night in his study, surrounded by legal documents and looking older than his 38 years. "I've been thinking about the Portland offer," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Isabella, let me finish. Victoria's not really fighting for Emma. She's fighting against you. Against the idea that Sarah can be replaced in any way." Isabella picked up a framed photo from his desk, Sarah holding infant Emma, both of them laughing at something off camera. She loved her sister. But grief makes people do terrible things. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Isabella's face in the lamplight. "What are you suggesting?" "That maybe we need to understand what she's really afraid of before we can fight her." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dorothy arrived at Marcus's door the next morning carrying a manila folder and wearing the satisfied expression of a cat who'd caught a particularly troublesome mouse. "Sit down, both of you," she commanded, settling herself at the kitchen table while Isabella poured coffee. "I've been busy." The folder contained printouts of social media posts, restaurant reviews, and newspaper clippings dating back 5 years. Dorothy spread them out like evidence in a murder trial. "Victoria's been destroying careers longer than we thought. Look at this." She pointed to a review from 2019. Marcus Tillman, head chef at Meridian. Rising star, innovative menu. Then suddenly his signature dishes start appearing at Victoria's new restaurant 2 weeks before his debut. His career tanked and now he's working at a food truck in San Antonio. Isabella leaned forward, studying the documents. This pattern, it's exactly what happened to me, but she's been doing it for years. Gets better. Dorothy flipped to another page. Jennifer Nakamura, pastry chef. Victoria hired her for a collaboration, then claimed Jennifer's dessert designs as her own family recipes. Jennifer tried to sue but couldn't afford the legal battle. The list went on. 7 chefs over 5 years, all young, all talented, all destroyed by Victoria's systematic theft of their creativity. "How did you find all this?" Marcus asked. Dorothy's eyes twinkled. "Honey, I ran a restaurant for 30 years. We're a tight community when we want to be. Started making calls, and these poor kids were eager to talk once they knew someone was finally listening." Isabella stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden Sarah had planted. "She stole more than recipes from me. She stole my identity, my confidence, my belief that hard work mattered." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "I let her convince me I deserved what happened, that I was naive and weak." "Well, you're not weak anymore," Dorothy said firmly. "And neither are the others. I've been in touch with them. They want to help." The plan that emerged was ambitious and risky. Instead of simply defending against Victoria's custody suit, they would expose her pattern of predatory behavior. The other chefs would testify, providing evidence of a systematic campaign to steal intellectual property and destroy careers. But first, Isabella had to do something she'd avoided for 18 months. She had to cook professionally again. The Austin Food and Wine Festival was 3 weeks away. Dorothy had connections with the organizers, and they'd agreed to give Isabella a booth, under one condition. She had to use her real name and face the media attention that would inevitably follow. "I can't," Isabella whispered when Dorothy first proposed the idea. "What if I freeze up? What if I've forgotten how to cook for strangers?" "Honey, you've been cooking for Marcus and Emma like you were born to it. The only difference is the size of the audience." Emma, who had been quietly coloring at the kitchen table, looked up. "Bella, remember what you told me about baking cookies? You said the love is the most important ingredient, and love makes everything taste better." The simple wisdom of a 7-year-old cut through Isabella's fears more effectively than any pep talk. She knelt beside Emma's chair. "You're right, little star. Love is the secret ingredient." The weeks leading up to the festival became a whirlwind of preparation. Isabella tested recipes in Marcus's kitchen while Emma acted as official taste tester. Dorothy coordinated with the other chefs Victoria had wronged, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. Marcus watched Isabella transform day by day. The hesitant woman who'd been digging through trash became confident and commanding in the kitchen. She moved with purpose, her hands sure and steady as she chopped, seasoned, and plated. But the media attention intensified as the festival approached. Paparazzi camped outside the house, following Emma to school and shouting questions about her new mommy. Marcus hired security, but the invasion of privacy felt suffocating. Victoria escalated too. The custody hearing was moved up to the week before the festival, citing concerns about Emma's exposure to media circus caused by Marcus's reckless relationship choices. The night before the hearing, Isabella sat in the garden where Sarah's roses were beginning to bloom in the February warmth. Marcus found her there, her recipe book open across her lap. "Second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her on the stone bench. "Terrified thoughts," she admitted. "What if we lose tomorrow? What if Emma ends up with someone who sees her as a possession instead of a person?" Marcus reached for her hand. "Then we'll appeal. We'll fight until there's nothing left to fight with. And your company? Your reputation? We'll survive, or it won't. But Emma needs to see that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you." Isabella leaned against his shoulder, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the scent of roses and the distant sound of Austin's evening traffic. "There's something I haven't told you," Isabella said finally, "about why I was really at that dumpster on Christmas Eve." Marcus waited, sensing this was important. "I wasn't looking for food. I was looking for a letter I'd thrown away, a suicide note I'd written and changed my mind about." Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled in his. "I'd been carrying it for weeks, this plan to end everything quietly. But that night I realized I'd thrown it away in the wrong dumpster, and suddenly I needed to find it, to make sure no one else ever found it." The confession hung between them like a bridge across a chasm. Marcus understood now why she'd looked so lost that night, why Emma's simple kindness had broken through her walls so completely. "What changed your mind?" he asked quietly. Isabella smiled, touching the cover of her recipe book. "I remembered my grandmother's last words to me. She said, 'Mija, as long as someone needs feeding, you have purpose in this world.' I realized I'd been so focused on what I'd lost that I forgot what I could still give." The next morning, they walked into the courthouse together. Marcus, Isabella, Emma, and Dorothy, who'd insisted on coming for moral support and because someone needs to stare down Victoria's lawyer. Emma wore her best dress and carried a drawing she'd made of their family, which now included Isabella and Dorothy as bonus mommies. Victoria's legal team was impressive and expensive, armed with character witnesses who testified to her stability, her successful business, her long-standing relationship with Emma. They painted Marcus as a grieving widower making impulsive decisions that put his daughter at risk. But when Isabella took the stand, everything shifted. She spoke quietly, but clearly, about the systematic campaign of theft and intimidation. She produced evidence of Victoria's pattern with other chefs, of the lies spread to the media, of the calculated cruelty designed to drive her away from Emma. "I'm not asking to replace Sarah," Isabella said, looking directly at Victoria. "I'm asking for the chance to honor her memory by loving her daughter the way she deserves to be loved." The judge, an older woman with kind eyes and steel in her voice, listened carefully to all the testimony. When Victoria's lawyer suggested that Isabella was an unstable influence due to her recent homelessness, the judge raised her hand. "Counselor, in my 40 years on this bench, I've learned that stability isn't about bank accounts or addresses. It's about consistency of love and care. From what I've heard today, Mrs. Martinez has provided more of both in 2 months than many people manage in years." The custody challenge was dismissed, but the victory felt hollow when they returned home to find reporters crowding their front yard and neighbors peering over fences with curious eyes. Emma hid behind Isabella's legs, overwhelmed by the attention. "Maybe I should take that Portland job after all," Isabella said that evening as they watched the news coverage from behind drawn curtains. "This circus isn't fair to Emma." "The circus will follow you anywhere now," Dorothy pointed out pragmatically. "Might as well face it somewhere you have family support." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Are we a family now? For real?" The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Marcus looked at Isabella, seeing in her face the same hope and fear he felt in his own heart. "What do you think, little star?" Isabella asked, kneeling beside Emma's chair. "I think families are people who take care of each other and don't leave when things get hard." Emma's 7-year-old wisdom cut straight to the heart of everything. "So yeah, we're family." Outside, the reporters were packing up their cameras, already moving on to the next story. But inside, around a kitchen table covered in Emma's artwork and scattered recipe cards, something permanent was taking root. Messy and complicated and absolutely real. The Austin Food and Wine Festival arrived with the kind of blazing February heat that reminded everyone why Texas wasn't like other places. Isabella stood in her assigned booth at 7 a.m., watching vendors set up around her while her hands shook so badly she could barely tie her apron. "Breathe, honey," Dorothy commanded, appearing at her elbow with a thermos of coffee and the kind of no-nonsense expression that had intimidated restaurant suppliers for 3 decades. You've cooked for presidents and food critics. These are just hungry people who want good food. That was before, Isabella whispered, watching the early crowd begin to filter through the festival grounds. Before I lost everything. What if I've forgotten how? Marcus arrived with Emma in tow, both carrying boxes of supplies. Emma wore a miniature apron that read Sous Chef in glittery letters. Dorothy's doing, naturally. She marched straight to Isabella and grabbed her trembling hands. Bella, remember what you told me about butterflies in my tummy before school? You said they weren't scared butterflies. They were excited butterflies getting ready to fly. The simple wisdom hit Isabella like a revelation. She knelt to Emma's level, seeing her own fear reflected in the child's earnest brown eyes. You're right, little star. These are flying butterflies. The first customers trickled in around 9 a.m., cautious but curious. Isabella had planned a simple menu, 3 dishes that represented her journey. Street tacos with her grandmother's seasoning blend, representing her roots. A deconstructed pozole that showed her culinary school training. And finally, comfort food, mac and cheese elevated with truffle oil and locally sourced cheese, representing the fusion of her past and present. The first taste changed everything. A food blogger took one bite of the street taco and closed her eyes in reverence. This is what authenticity tastes like, she murmured, already pulling out her phone to take pictures. Word spread through the festival with the speed that only truly exceptional food can generate. By noon, Isabella's booth had a line 30 people deep. She moved through the prep work like a dancer, her knife skills sharp and sure, her hands steady for the first time in months. Marcus watched from the side, marveling at the transformation. This was Isabella, as she was meant to be, confident, creative, completely in her element. Emma perched on a stool beside the prep table, chattering with customers and charming everyone who came near. "That's my Bella," she announced to anyone who would listen. "She makes food that tastes like hugs and teaches me about love ingredients." The media attention was inevitable. Food Network cameras appeared first, drawn by the buzz and the human interest story. Isabella handled the interviews with grace, talking about second chances and the healing power of cooking for people who appreciate it. Then Victoria arrived. She swept through the festival grounds like a queen surveying her domain, flanked by 2 assistants and dressed in designer everything. Her own booth, a massive setup promoting her restaurant empire, sat at the festival's prime location, but it was nearly empty while Isabella's drew crowds. "Quite the spectacle," Victoria said, approaching Isabella's booth with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, though I suppose any chef can draw a crowd with cheap comfort food. Isabella's hands stilled on the knife she'd been using to dice onions. Around them, conversations quieted as people sensed the tension. "Victoria," Isabella said carefully, "I didn't expect to see you here. I wouldn't miss Austin's premier food event, especially when it features such interesting participants." Victoria's gaze swept over the booth, taking in the handwritten menu, the modest setup, Emma coloring at a small table in the corner. "Though I have to wonder about the wisdom of using a child as a marketing prop." The accusation hit like a slap. Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight, but Isabella placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Emma's not a prop," Isabella said quietly. "She's family, and she's here because she wants to be, not because I need her to be." "Family." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. "How convenient. Tell me, Isabella, have you shared your complete history with your new family? All of it?" The threat in her voice made Isabella's blood run cold. She glanced at Emma, still innocently coloring, and felt protective fury rise in her chest. "There's nothing to hide," Isabella replied, but her voice wavered slightly. Victoria's smile widened. Really? Nothing at all? How refreshing. Most people in your situations have such complicated pasts. Before Isabella could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. Victoria Ashford. They turned to see a man approaching, mid-30s, chef's whites, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found their place in the world again. Behind him stood a woman with short black hair and determination in her eyes. And behind her, three more people Isabella didn't recognize but somehow knew were allies. Marcus Tillman, the first man said, extending his hand to Isabella. We spoke on the phone. These are Jennifer, Carlos, and Nina, and David. Isabella's heart stopped. The last man in the group was her ex-husband, looking older and carrying what appeared to be a briefcase full of documents. What is this? Victoria demanded, her composure cracking slightly. This, Dorothy said, appearing with perfect timing and a folder of her own, is what we call a reckoning. Marcus Tillman stepped forward, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet festival area. 5 years ago, Victoria Ashford stole my signature dish and destroyed my career when I tried to expose her. 3 years ago, she did the same thing to Jennifer here, and to Carlos, and to Nina. And to Isabella, David added, his voice heavy with guilt and regret. My ex-wife created something beautiful, and I helped Victoria steal it because I was weak and greedy and thought money mattered more than integrity. Victoria's face had gone pale. This is ridiculous. You can't prove... Actually, we can. Jennifer stepped forward, pulling out a tablet. Recipes, emails, financial records. David kept everything, and he's been working with a lawyer for months to make this right. The crowd around them had grown, drawn by the drama and the implications. Food Network cameras rolled, capturing every moment of what was becoming a very public confrontation. You see, Dorothy continued, her voice carrying the authority of decades in the restaurant business, Victoria's been systematically destroying young chefs for years, stealing their creativity, ruining their reputations, and building her empire on other people's dreams. Victoria looked around at the faces surrounding her, some curious, some disgusted, some openly hostile. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling in real time, broadcasted live to thousands of people. This is a conspiracy, she said desperately. They're all lying, trying to destroy me because they couldn't succeed on their own. Then explain this, David said, pulling out a thick stack of papers. Contracts you made me sign, giving you exclusive rights to Isabella's recipes. Financial records showing payments for consultation that was really theft. Email chains where you planned exactly how to discredit her when she got too close to the truth. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Victoria's assistants began backing away, clearly wanting no part in the disaster unfolding around their boss. Emma, who had been watching the adult drama with the sharp intelligence children possess, walked over to Isabella and took her hand. Bella, she said in her clear, carrying voice, is the mean lady the reason you were so sad when we found you? The question, asked with a child's perfect innocence, cut through all the legal terminology and business accusations. It reduced the entire situation to its essential truth. A talented woman had been destroyed by someone else's greed and cruelty. Isabella knelt beside Emma, her eyes never leaving Victoria's face. Yes, little star. But not anymore. Victoria looked around at the crowd of faces, former victims finding their voices, customers who now understood the real story, media representatives documenting her downfall. Her empire, built on stolen dreams, was collapsing under the weight of truth. You think you've won something here? Victoria said, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. You think exposing me changes what you are? You're still a homeless woman who seduced a grieving widower for his money. The words hung in the air like poison, designed to wound and destroy. But instead of crumbling, Isabella stood straighter. "You're right about one thing," she said clearly. "I was homeless. I did lose everything. But I never lost who I was at heart. Someone who cooks with love, who believes in second chances, who knows that family isn't about blood or money or status. It's about showing up for each other when everything falls apart." She gestured around the booth at Marcus and Emma and Dorothy, at the chefs who had come forward to support her, at the customers who had become invested in her story. "This is my family, chosen, complicated, real, and no amount of your poison can touch what we've built together." The crowd erupted in applause. Food bloggers snapped photos. Social media exploded with support for Isabella and condemnation of Victoria's predatory business practices. Victoria stood in the center of it all, isolated and exposed, watching her carefully constructed facade crumble. Her restaurants, her reputation, her identity as Austin's food royalty, all of it built on lies and theft, now revealed in the harsh light of truth. Marcus stepped beside Isabella, taking her other hand. "Victoria," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite the chaos around them. "Sarah would be ashamed of what you've become. She loved you like a sister, and you've dishonored her memory with every career you've destroyed." The words were the final blow. Victoria's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked less like a powerful businesswoman and more like what she really was, a broken person who had chosen cruelty over healing. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her assistant scrambling to follow. The crowd parted for her, but not with respect, with the kind of distance people maintain from something toxic and dangerous. As the immediate drama faded, Isabella found herself surrounded by supporters, fellow chefs, food lovers who had watched justice unfold in real time. But her attention was focused on the little girl, still holding her hand. "Is it over now?" Emma asked. "Are we safe?" Isabella looked around at their chosen family, at Dorothy beaming with pride, at Marcus watching her with love and admiration, at the community that had formed around their booth. "Yes, little star," she said, pulling Emma into a hug. "We're safe, we're home, and we're just getting started." The festival continued around them, but for Isabella, the real victory wasn't in exposing Victoria or reclaiming her reputation. It was in the feeling of belonging, of being valued for who she was rather than what she'd lost. For the first time in 18 months, she could breathe freely. The victory at the food festival should have felt like an ending, but instead it marked the beginning of something far more devastating. 3 days after Victoria's public humiliation, Isabella woke to find her phone buzzing with notifications that made her blood turn to ice. The headlines were everywhere. Food festival fraud, hidden criminal past exposed. Homeless chef's dark secret revealed. Child endangerment, what millionaire dad didn't know about his live-in lover. Isabella's hands shook as she scrolled through article after article, each one more damning than the last. Someone had leaked sealed juvenile records showing an arrest at 15 for shoplifting food for her younger siblings. A mugshot from when she'd been detained during a homeless sweep 6 months ago. Most devastating of all, medical records suggesting she'd been treated for depression and suicidal ideation. The invasion of privacy was breathtaking in its cruelty and thoroughness. Every low point of her life had been excavated and weaponized, presented without context or compassion. Marcus found her in the kitchen at 5 a.m., still in yesterday's clothes, staring at her laptop screen with hollow eyes. "Isabella, you need to see something," he said gently, settling beside her at the table. His own phone showed missed calls from his board of directors, his investors, his company's PR firm. The tech world moved fast, and association with scandal could destroy a business overnight. Already his company's stock price had dropped 12% in pre-market trading. "I have to go," Isabella whispered. "Emma can't wake up to this. She can't go to school today and have classmates ask her about these headlines." As if summoned by her words, Emma appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed bear. Her 7-year-old face was serious in the way children look when they sense adult catastrophe. "Daddy, why are people saying mean things about Bella on the TV?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd hoped to shield Emma from the worst of it, but in the age of social media and 24-hour news cycles, protection was an illusion. "Sometimes people say things that aren't true, sweetheart," he managed. "But why would they lie about Bella? She's good. She makes the sad butterflies in my tummy go away." Isabella knelt beside Emma's chair, fighting back tears. "Little star, sometimes when people are hurt or angry, they try to hurt other people too. It doesn't make it right. But that's what's happening. Are you going away?" Emma's voice was small and frightened. The direct question hung in the air like smoke. Isabella looked at Marcus, seeing her own anguish reflected in his eyes. How could they explain to a child that sometimes love wasn't enough, that the adult world had rules and consequences that could tear apart everything good and innocent? Dorothy's arrival saved them from having to answer immediately. The older woman burst through the back door, carrying her morning newspaper and wearing an expression that could have melted steel. "Those bastards," she announced without preamble, slapping the paper onto the counter. 40 years I've been reading the Austin Chronicle, and this is the most disgusting hit piece I've ever seen." She turned to Isabella with fierce protectiveness. "Honey, I lived through McCarthyism and the Civil Rights Movement. I know character assassination when I see it, and this stinks of desperation." "Dorothy, it doesn't matter if it's fair," Isabella said quietly. "The damage is done. Emma will be followed by reporters. Marcus could lose his company. I won't be responsible for destroying their lives." "So you're just giving up? After everything we've built, everything we've proven?" "I'm protecting the people I love." The argument might have continued, but Emma's voice cut through it with devastating clarity. "I don't want you to protect me. I want you to stay." The simple statement from a 7-year-old reduced the room to silence. Isabella pulled Emma onto her lap, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Sometimes protecting people means making hard choices, little star. Like when Mommy went to heaven to protect me from her sick germs?" The innocent comparison shattered something in Isabella's chest. Emma had processed her mother's death as an act of protection rather than abandonment. And now she was watching another mother figure prepare to leave for the same stated reason. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "Emma, why don't you go get dressed for school? We'll figure out the rest." "I don't want to go to school." "I want to stay home and help fix the mean people's lies." After some gentle persuasion, Emma reluctantly went upstairs to get ready. The moment she was out of earshot, Isabella turned to Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this to her again. She's already lost one mother. How can I put her through losing another? So stay and fight." "With what? My juvenile record? My mental health history? The fact that I was literally homeless 3 months ago?" Isabella gestured toward the laptop screen filled with damaging headlines. "They've made me toxic, Marcus. Every day I stay here, Emma gets hurt more." Dorothy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly straightened with the kind of dangerous gleam in her eyes that came from 72 years of surviving life's worst moments. "You know what? Maybe it's time these people learned what happens when you come after my family." Before either Marcus or Isabella could ask what she meant, Dorothy was pulling out her phone and dialing with the efficiency of someone declaring war. Jimmy, it's Dorothy Harrison. Remember that favor you owe me from when I kept your restaurant from getting shut down in '98? Well, I'm calling it in. Over the next hour, Dorothy made a series of calls that revealed the full extent of her connections throughout Austin's business and political landscape. Restaurant owners, city council members, newspaper editors, and what appeared to be half the Chamber of Commerce found themselves on the receiving end of Dorothy Harrison's legendary temper. "Here's what's going to happen," she announced after hanging up from her final call. "The Chronicle is running a retraction and apology tomorrow morning. Channel 4 is doing an investigative piece on media manipulation and privacy violations. And Mayor Rodriguez is personally going to present Isabella with a key to the city for her community service work." Isabella stared at her in disbelief. "How did you—" "Honey, I've been feeding this city's power brokers for 40 years. Politicians, judges, business leaders, they all came through my restaurant at some point. Some of them met their spouses at my tables, celebrated their children's birthdays in my private dining room. When Dorothy Harrison calls in her markers, people listen." But even Dorothy's formidable network couldn't stop the immediate consequences. Marcus's board called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Emma's school suggested she stay home until the media attention died down. The family that had felt so solid just days ago was fracturing under external pressure. The breaking point came that evening when Emma found Isabella packing her suitcase. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Emma's 7-year-old voice held the kind of resigned devastation that no child should ever have to master. "I'm trying to make things better for you and your daddy." "By going away forever?" Isabella sat on the bed, pulling Emma close. "Not forever, just until people stop being mean and saying lies. Mommy said she was going away to make me safer too." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "But she never came back." The parallel was too devastating to ignore. Isabella felt something break inside her chest, the same thing that had broken when her ex-husband stole her identity, when her parents disowned her, when she'd found herself digging through trash on Christmas Eve. "I'm not dying, little star. I'm just leaving, like everyone leaves." Emma pulled away, her small face set with the kind of protective numbness children develop when the adults in their lives keep disappearing. "It's okay. I understand now." The acceptance in Emma's voice was worse than tears would have been. And she walked out of the room with dignity that belonged to someone much older, leaving Isabella alone with her suitcase and the sound of her own heart breaking. Downstairs, Marcus sat at the kitchen table surrounded by the wreckage of his professional life. Stock prices, board meeting notes, resignation letters from key employees who didn't want to be associated with the scandal. Everything he'd built since Sarah's death was crumbling, and the woman he'd fallen in love with was upstairs packing to leave. When Isabella appeared with her suitcase, he looked up with eyes that held too much pain for one person to carry. "So this is it? We let them win? We protect Emma. That's all that matters now." Outside, a car waited to take her to the bus station. The Portland restaurant had renewed their offer, promising anonymity and a fresh start 3,000 miles away from the wreckage of her Austin life. As Isabella walked toward the door, she heard Emma's voice from the top of the stairs. "Bella, when you cook for new people, will you remember to tell them about the love ingredients?" The question shattered the last of Isabella's composure. She dropped her suitcase and ran back to Emma, pulling her into a fierce hug that tasted of salt tears and desperate promises. "Always, little star. Always." But sometimes, love wasn't enough to overcome the world's cruelty. And as Isabella walked out into the Texas night, she left behind more than just a family. She left behind the last of her faith that good people could triumph simply by being good. 3 months passed like a slow hemorrhage. Portland's rain matched Isabella's mood, gray, persistent, and seemingly without end. The restaurant job was everything they'd promised, Anonymity, decent pay, and the blessed relief of cooking without cameras or questions about her past. But success felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. She rented a studio apartment above a coffee shop, sparse and clean, and nothing like the warm chaos of Marcus's kitchen. Every night she video called Dorothy, who provided updates on Emma and Marcus with the careful neutrality of someone trying not to take sides in heartbreak. "Emma's doing well in school," Dorothy would report, her weathered face pixelated on Isabella's laptop screen. "She's joined the cooking club, makes your grandmother's salsa recipe every week, and tells everyone about the love ingredients." Marcus, according to Dorothy's carefully edited reports, was surviving. His company had stabilized after the initial stock drop, the board apparently deciding that personal scandals were less important than quarterly profits. But he wasn't thriving. Dorothy's diplomatic silences spoke volumes about sleepless nights and a house that felt empty despite being technically occupied. "He asks about you," Dorothy admitted one evening in early May. "Every day. Emma, too, though she's stopped setting your place at dinner." The detail hit Isabella like a physical blow. Emma had given up hope, accepted another abandonment as the natural order of things. It was exactly what Isabella had tried to prevent, and exactly what she'd caused by leaving. "Maybe it's better this way," Isabella said, though the words tasted like ash. "Honey, the only thing better about this situation is that Victoria Ashford is finally getting what she deserves." The investigation into Victoria's business practices had mushroomed beyond anyone's expectations. Federal authorities were now involved, looking into tax evasion and intellectual property theft. 3 of her restaurants had closed. The woman who had seemed so powerful just months ago was facing potential prison time. But her destruction felt like cold comfort when Isabella's own life remained fractured. The revelation came not through Dorothy's careful reports, but through a late-night phone call that changed everything. Isabella was closing the restaurant, wiping down surfaces, and preparing for another lonely night in her apartment when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Isabella, this is David." Her ex-husband's voice made her hand tighten on the phone. They hadn't spoken since the food festival, since he'd helped expose Victoria's systematic theft. "What do you want, David?" "To tell you the truth. All of it. About Victoria, about what really happened to us, about why I did what I did." His voice was heavy with exhaustion and what sounded like genuine remorse. "I've been in therapy for months, trying to understand why I destroyed the best thing in my life." Isabella sank onto a prep table, suddenly too tired to stand. "It's too late for apologies. This isn't about apologies, it's about justice, and about giving you back something I helped steal." What followed was a confession that rewrote everything Isabella thought she knew about her marriage and its catastrophic end. Victoria hadn't just stumbled across David's weakness and exploited it. She'd orchestrated their introduction at a culinary conference, researched Isabella's background, and systematically seduced David away from his wife with a combination of money, career advancement, and carefully manipulated jealousy. "She showed me fake emails that made it look like you were cheating," David admitted, his voice breaking. "Photos that were doctored. She convinced me that you didn't love me, that you were using me to advance your own career. I was weak enough to believe her because it was easier than admitting I felt threatened by your talent." The manipulation had been thorough and patient. Victoria had spent 2 years positioning herself as David's confidant and advisor, slowly poisoning his relationship with Isabella while simultaneously stealing her recipes and business plans. The cookbook theft was her idea from the beginning. She wanted your work, but she also wanted to destroy you completely. She saw you as a threat to her position in Austin's food scene. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling something shift in her chest. The betrayal she'd carried for 2 years, the belief that her husband had simply chosen greed over love, was more complicated than she'd known. David had been manipulated too, though his weakness didn't absolve him of responsibility. Why are you telling me this now? Because Victoria made a mistake. She kept records, emails, financial documents, even recordings of some conversations. The FBI found them when they raided her offices last week. David's voice grew stronger. Isabella, we have proof of everything: the manipulation, the theft, the systematic destruction of your career. Her lawyers are trying to make a deal, but the evidence is overwhelming. The legal implications were staggering. Not only could Isabella's reputation be fully restored, but she might be entitled to damages that could fund any dream she chose to pursue. But as David continued explaining the technical details of the case, Isabella found herself thinking not about vindication or money, but about a 7-year-old girl who had stopped setting an extra place at dinner. The call ended with promises to send documents and coordinate with attorneys. Isabella sat in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the tools of her trade, and felt more lost than ever. Justice was finally within reach, but the people she wanted to share it with were a continent away, probably moving on with their lives. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but the words made her heart stop. Bella, it's Emma. Dorothy taught me to text. Daddy doesn't know. Are you coming home soon? I miss your pancakes. Love, your little star. Isabella stared at the screen until tears blurred the words. Emma hadn't given up. She'd learned to use technology to bridge the gap that adult complications had created. Before she could second-guess herself, Isabella was dialing Marcus's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She almost hung up when his voice came through, rough with sleep and surprise. Isabella? Marcus, I'm sorry to call so late. I just spoke with David, and there are things you need to know. About Victoria? About what really happened? Are you okay? The concern in his voice cut through her prepared speech. No. I'm not okay. I'm miserable, and I miss you and Emma so much I can barely breathe, and I just found out that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. Where are you right now? In the restaurant kitchen in Portland, crying into a phone at midnight because I'm apparently incapable of making good decisions about anything that matters. Marcus's laugh was soft and sad. That makes 2 of us. Emma talks about you every day. She's been teaching Dorothy's nephew how to make your grandmother's salsa, and she insists on calling it Bella's love recipe. David says Victoria kept records of everything. The FBI has proof that she orchestrated our divorce, stole my work, destroyed my reputation on purpose. I could have my name back. Marcus. My real identity. And what do you want to do with it? The question hung in the air like a bridge between past and future. Isabella looked around the sterile kitchen where she'd been hiding for 3 months, then closed her eyes and pictured Marcus's warm, chaotic space filled with Emma's laughter and the scent of home-cooked meals. I want to come home, she whispered. If there's still room for me there. Isabella, there was never a question about room. Emma's been keeping your coffee mug on the counter since the day you left. She says it's waiting for you. What about your company, the board? Can go to hell if they have a problem with my personal life. I've learned something these past 3 months. Success without family to share it with isn't success at all. It's just expensive loneliness. The conversation that followed lasted until dawn, filled with tears and laughter and the careful rebuilding of trust that had been damaged by external forces but never truly broken. They talked about Emma's progress in school, about Dorothy's latest schemes to matchmake the entire neighborhood, about the legal case that would finally give Isabella her identity back. But mostly they talked about coming home. There's one thing, Marcus said as the sun began to rise over Portland's skyline. Emma's been planning something she calls Bella's Welcome Home Party since the week after you left. Dorothy's been helping her, and I'm pretty sure it involves enough food to feed half of Austin." Isabella laughed for the first time in months, picturing Emma's serious planning face and Dorothy's enabling grin. "I suppose I better start practicing my surprised face." "You better start practicing your appetite. Emma's been experimenting with dessert recipes, and our kitchen looks like a flower bomb went off most afternoons." "Marcus?" "Yeah?" "Tell Emma that love ingredients work best when the whole family is together to share them." "Tell her yourself." "She'll be awake in about 2 hours, and she checks her phone for messages every 5 minutes." As Isabella hung up and began mentally preparing for the journey home, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: the absolute certainty that she belonged somewhere, with people who would fight for her as fiercely as she would fight for them. The legal battle ahead would be complex and public. Victoria's downfall would generate media attention that might be uncomfortable. But Isabella had learned something crucial during her months in exile. Running from problems doesn't solve them, and love worth having is love worth fighting for. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Emma. "Pack the ingredients, little star. Bella's coming home to cook." The response came back almost instantly, despite the early hour. "Yay! Daddy's crying happy tears. Dorothy says to tell you she's making your favorite pie." "When?" Isabella looked at her sparse apartment, at the restaurant job that had been safe but not satisfying, at the rain-soaked city that had given her shelter but never felt like home. "Tomorrow," she typed back. "Bella's coming home tomorrow." The flight from Portland to Austin felt eternal and instantaneous all at once. Isabella pressed her face to the small airplane window, watching Texas spread out below her like a patchwork quilt of possibility. Her hands trembled as she clutched the leather recipe book, now legally recognized as her intellectual property thanks to the FBI's investigation into Victoria's crimes. David had been true to his word. The evidence was overwhelming, documented proof of years of systematic manipulation and theft. Victoria's plea bargain included full restitution and a public acknowledgement of Isabella's ownership of the stolen recipes. More importantly, it included a detailed confession that cleared Isabella's name completely. The media narrative had shifted overnight. Wrongfully accused chef returns home replaced homeless gold digger exposed. Food Network had already called about a documentary. Publishers were interested in her real story, not the fabricated scandals Victoria had planted. But none of that mattered as much as the small figure Isabella could see through the airport terminal windows, bouncing on her toes beside a man who looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. Emma spotted her first, breaking free from Marcus's hand to press against the glass, with a grin so wide it seemed to split her 7-year-old face in half. She held up a hand-painted sign that read, "Welcome Home, Bella," in rainbow letters, with small drawings of hearts and cooking utensils around the borders. The moment Isabella cleared security, Emma launched herself forward with the fearless abandon unique to children who have waited too long for someone they love to return. "Bella, Bella, you're really here!" "I knew you'd come back because I kept wishing on every birthday candle and dandelion and shooting star, and Dorothy said wishes only work if you really believe them with your whole heart." Isabella caught Emma in a hug that lifted the little girl off her feet, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. Over Emma's head, she met Marcus's eyes, tired but bright with relief and something deeper that made her heart stutter. "Welcome home," he said simply, and the words contained everything they couldn't say in front of Emma about missed nights and regret and the careful rebuilding of trust. Dorothy appeared from behind a pillar, moving with surprising stealth for a 72-year-old woman carrying a casserole dish and wearing a shirt that read "Team Bella" in glittery letters. "About damn time," she announced, enveloping Isabella in a hug that smelled of vanilla and stubborn determination. This family's been walking around like lost puppies for 3 months. Marcus burned 4 dinners last week alone. I did not burn 4 dinners, Marcus protested. 3 dinners and 1 attempt at pancakes. The pancakes don't count because they were more like hockey pucks, Emma added with brutal 7-year-old honesty. But I ate them anyway because they tasted like missing you sadness, and sometimes you have to eat your feelings. The drive home revealed Austin in late May glory, wildflowers blooming along the highways, the evening light golden and warm in a way that Portland's gray skies had never managed. Emma chattered nonstop from the back seat, filling Isabella in on 3 months of school projects, friend drama, and cooking experiments with Dorothy. And guess what? I learned to make your grandmother's salsa, and Mrs. Henderson from next door said it was better than her restaurant, and Tommy Morrison said girls can't cook spicy food, so I made him try it and he cried, but then he asked for the recipe for his mom. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, but Isabella could feel the difference the moment she walked through the front door. It wasn't just that her coffee mug sat prominently on the kitchen counter, or that someone had framed the drawing Emma made of their family and hung it in the living room. It was something intangible, the sense that this space had been waiting, incomplete without all its pieces in place. "Surprise!" Emma shrieked, though she'd already spoiled the surprise by talking about it for the entire car ride. The kitchen table groaned under the weight of Isabella's favorite foods, prepared with obvious care and presented with the kind of loving imperfection that made everything taste better. Dorothy had made her famous apple pie. Marcus had attempted homemade bread that was slightly lopsided but smelled like heaven. Emma's contribution was a bowl of salsa surrounded by chips arranged in a heart pattern, with a small sign declaring it made with extra love ingredients for Bella's coming home party. "This is beautiful," Isabella said, and meant it. The food was wonderful. But the real nourishment came from being surrounded by people who had chosen to love her despite scandal, distance, and the complicated messiness of real life. As they ate, Emma regaled them with detailed plans for everything we're going to do now that our family is complete again. The list included teaching Isabella's cooking techniques to her entire second-grade class, opening a family restaurant where Emma would be head taste tester, and making sure Dorothy moved in permanently because she's part of our family too, and families should live together. "What do you think about all these plans?" Marcus asked Isabella as Emma paused to take a breath. Isabella looked around the table, at Emma's bright face sticky with pie, at Dorothy's knowing smile, at Marcus's eyes full of hope and determination. She thought about the legal vindication waiting in lawyers' offices, the career opportunities that would follow, the public restoration of her reputation and identity. But mostly she thought about how the kitchen smelled like home again, and how the empty spaces in her heart had suddenly filled with the sound of family laughter. "I think," Isabella said, reaching across the table to take Marcus's hand while Emma climbed into her lap, "that some plans are perfect exactly as they are." Outside, the Texas sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the windows with light that promised new beginnings. And inside, around a table covered with crumbs and love, 3 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances began planning a future that would be complicated and beautiful and absolutely worth fighting for. Emma fell asleep in Isabella's arms before the dishes were cleared, and no one had the heart to move her. Dear friends, this story touches something deep in all our hearts. The fear that our best years are behind us, that second chances don't come after 50, that loneliness might be our permanent companion. Like Isabella digging through that dumpster, many of us have felt invisible, discarded by a world that values youth over wisdom. But here's what I've learned from 4 decades of living. Family isn't just blood relatives who share your Thanksgiving table. Family is the person who notices when you're struggling, who sees your worth when the world doesn't, who chooses to stay when staying gets hard. Dorothy at 72 became the fierce protector this makeshift family needed. Marcus learned that love isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about having courage to embrace what you've found. And Emma? She taught everyone that love multiplies when we share it, doesn't divide. Whether you're 55 or 75, whether you've been divorced, widowed, or simply feel forgotten, your story isn't over. Your kitchen table isn't too small for new family members. Your heart isn't too old for new love. The most beautiful chapters often begin when we think the book is ending. Interaction questions. What found family member has made the biggest difference in your life after 50? Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and following your heart? What did you learn from that experience? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters and could inspire someone who needs to hear it today.